Ruth and Henry were a newlywed couple filled with joy and hope for their future. After their wedding ceremony, they returned home eager to unwrap the gifts they had received from loved ones. Among the presents, one stood out, a beautifully wrapped package with no name or note. Inside, they found a stunning golden-framed mirror. Ruth was enchanted by the mirror's intricate design and immediately decided to hang it in their bedroom. Henry, however, felt uneasy about the gift, questioning who would give such an item anonymously. Despite his reservations, Ruth insisted it was a lovely addition to their home. That night, strange occurrences began. Shadows moved unnaturally, whispers filled the quiet house, and Ruth felt an unsettling presence in their bedroom. Over time, these events escalated. Whenever Ruth became pregnant, she would feel a mysterious touch in the night, followed by a heartbreaking miscarriage. Each time, she accused Henry of harming her, but he always denied it, his confusion and sorrow mirroring her own. The strain on their marriage grew unbearable. The once loving couple now lived under a shadow of mistrust and despair. Meanwhile, the golden-framed mirror stood silently, its glass reflecting their anguish. Desperate for a solution, Ruth confided in her stepmother, Mrs. Agnes. Agnes suggested seeking help from a prophetess known for her spiritual insight. The prophetess revealed a shocking truth. The mirror was cursed, linked to a malevolent water spirit. The spirit was drawn to Ruth and sought to claim her unborn children. The prophetess advised a cleansing ritual, but the ritual was painful and terrifying. Ruth endured it, hoping it would break the spirit's hold on her life. For a time, it seemed as though the ritual had worked. Ruth became pregnant again, and she and Henry dared to hope for a brighter future. As her pregnancy progressed, the strange events returned. Shadows grew darker, and the presence Ruth felt in the night became more menacing. One fateful night, Ruth awoke to find blood on her bed once more. Devastated, she realized the spirit had not been vanquished. The native doctor they consulted confirmed their fears. The spirit's connection to Ruth was bound to the mirror, and the only way to break the curse was to destroy it. Together, Ruth and Henry carried the mirror to the riverbank. The native doctor performed a final ritual, instructing Ruth to smash the mirror. With trembling hands, Ruth struck the glass. The mirror shattered, releasing a dark, writhing mist that disappeared into the night sky. The oppressive weight that had plagued them lifted, leaving Ruth and Henry feeling a newfound sense of freedom. Months later, Ruth gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The laughter of their child filled the house that had once been marked by sorrow. The couple's love was renewed, and they found joy in their new chapter as parents. The golden-framed mirror was gone, and with it, the darkness that had haunted their lives. Ruth and Henry could finally embrace the happiness they had long yearned for, their family complete and their future bright. Ruth was pregnant again, and her heart swelled with hope and joy. She took extra care to protect her unborn child, doing everything she could to ensure its safety. One night, just as she drifted off to sleep, a dark and terrifying presence invaded her dreams. When she woke, an overwhelming sense of dread consumed her, and she knew deep down that something was wrong. Her worst fears were confirmed. She had lost the baby again. Ruth felt shattered, as though all her dreams had crumbled into dust. This time, Henry began to change. The man who had always been her rock now seemed distant and frustrated. He often avoided her, and the warmth they once shared felt like a distant memory. One afternoon, Ruth walked into their bedroom and saw Henry packing clothes into a suitcase. Confused, she asked if he was going somewhere. Without looking at her, Henry sighed and said, "No, I'm not traveling. I'm moving to the other room. I need my space, Ruth. I don't want to share a room anymore." His words hit her like a storm. Frozen, Ruth watched helplessly as Henry walked away. That night, Ruth lay alone in their bed, staring at the ceiling as tears streamed down her face. Her world felt like it was falling apart, and the emptiness consumed her. Days later, as she sat alone in the living room late at night, her worry for Henry grew. He hadn't answered her calls, and she didn't know where he was. When he finally stumbled through the door, Reeking of perfume and alcohol, Ruth's concern turned to anger. "Where have you been, Henry? Why didn't you answer my calls?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Henry laughed bitterly. "Why are you calling me? Do you think I'm your baby?" he muttered, pushing past her. Ruth stood in his path, her voice firm but desperate. "No, Henry, you're my husband. I deserve to know where you were." Henry's expression darkened, and before she could react, he slapped her across the face. The sting of his hand and the weight of his actions left her in shock. Tears streaming down her face, she watched him walk away without another word. Ella, awakened by Ruth's crying, rushed to her side and comforted her until she calmed down. The next morning, Ruth, unable to endure the pain any longer, packed a small bag and left for her stepmother's house. Mrs. Agnes welcomed her with open arms, listening intently as Ruth poured out her heartbreak. Furious about what Henry had done, Mrs. Agnes called him to warn him never to lay a hand on Ruth again. Even with her stepmother's comforting words, Ruth felt like a shadow of herself. Every night, she prayed, asking God for strength and solace. After a few days, she returned to Henry's house, longing to restore what had been broken. But Henry's cold indifference crushed her hopes. He barely acknowledged her, and her attempts to talk about their love were met with dismissal. Late one night, desperate for connection, Ruth went to Henry's room and sat beside him. "Henry, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Let's try again. How can I get pregnant if you don't even touch me?" Henry sighed heavily. "I'm tired, Ruth. Tired of all the hospital visits, the heartbreak, the losses. Just let me be." Heartbroken, Ruth watched as he grabbed a pillow and left the room, leaving her sitting there alone. Her world was unraveling, and she felt powerless to stop it. One sunny afternoon, Ruth sat quietly in the living room, reading her Bible. The words brought her a small sense of peace, a flicker of hope in her broken heart. Nearby, Ella was cleaning the house, humming softly as she worked. Everything seemed calm until Ella suddenly stopped, clutching her stomach and coughing hard. She rushed to the bathroom, vomiting violently. Ruth's heart raced with worry. She knocked on the bathroom door, her voice trembling. "Ella, are you okay?" Ella eventually emerged, looking pale and weak. Ruth held her by the arm, her concern evident. "We need to go to the hospital. I can't lose you, Ella. You're my only sister." Ruth drove quickly, her heart pounding as they waited at the hospital for the doctor's results. Finally, the doctor returned, holding a paper with a serious expression. "Ella, you're 2 months pregnant," he announced. Ruth froze, the words sinking in like a heavy weight. Back at home, she looked at Ella with tear-filled eyes. "Who's the father, Ella?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. Ella hesitated, avoiding Ruth's gaze. After a long pause, she whispered, "It's Henry." The revelation shattered Ruth's world. She sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face. The sister she loved, the husband she had forgiven, both had betrayed her. Ella cried too, guilt and regret written all over her face. When Henry returned home, Ruth confronted him. Her voice cracked with pain as she accused him. "You've been sleeping with my sister, and now she's pregnant. How could you do this to me?" Henry dropped to his knees, his face pale and tear-streaked. "I'm so sorry, Ruth. I didn't mean for this to happen. Please forgive me," he begged. But Ruth, too heartbroken to respond, packed her belongings and left for her stepmother's house. Once there, she poured her heart out to Mrs. Agnes, who listened in stunned silence. Anger flashed across her stepmother's face as she processed the betrayal. Mrs. Agnes called Henry and Ella over for a family meeting. When they arrived, she scolded them harshly. "What you've done is unforgivable. You've hurt Ruth and disgraced this family. But what's done is done. Ella, you're pregnant, and no daughter of mine will have a child out of wedlock. Henry, you must marry her." 2 weeks later, Henry and Ella were married in a small, somber ceremony. Ruth watched from a distance, feeling as if she were trapped in a nightmare. Ella moved into the matrimonial bedroom with Henry, and Ruth tried to move on, though the pain lingered. As Ella's pregnancy progressed, Henry seemed to dote on her, celebrating the upcoming arrival of their child. One evening, During a celebratory party thrown by Henry, Ella and her friend went to the bedroom to fix their makeup. Her friend noticed the ornate mirror in the room. "This mirror is so gaudy," her friend remarked. "Why do you even keep it here?" Ella laughed. "I know it's ugly. I've been meaning to replace it." Her friend offered to help move it. But as they lifted the mirror, it slipped from their grasp, shattering on the floor. The sound of the breaking glass echoed through the house. Ella's mother, who had been mingling with guests, let out a piercing scream. "No," she cried, rushing into the bedroom. She dropped to her knees beside the broken shards, wailing, "I'm finished. My life is over." The guests gathered, confused and alarmed. Ella's mother began to confess, revealing that the mirror had been enchanted, a tool she had used to sabotage Ruth's happiness and control her life. The room fell silent as she recounted how jealousy had driven her to destroy Ruth's pregnancies and marriage. As she finished, a strange look overtook her. She began pulling at her clothes, muttering incoherently, and then ran out of the house, disappearing into the streets. As the guests processed the shocking confession, the gateman stepped forward, trembling. "I can't keep quiet anymore," he said, kneeling before Henry. "Ella's baby, it's mine. We had a plan to make you believe it was yours because I couldn't take care of it." Henry's face turned pale with rage and humiliation. Unable to bear the truth, he stormed out of the house and drove to Ruth's stepmother's home. When he arrived, he found Ruth praying, her Bible clutched in her hands. She looked up, startled to see him. Tearfully, Henry confessed everything: the betrayal, the lies, the mirror, and his regrets. He begged for her forgiveness. Ruth, with tears in her eyes, saw the sincerity in his words. She forgave him, not out of weakness, but because she needed to heal. Together, they decided to start anew, leaving behind the pain and betrayal. 2 months later, they moved to America, seeking a fresh start. Months passed, and Ruth discovered she was pregnant again. This time, everything went smoothly. She gave birth to healthy twins, a boy and a girl, filling their home with love and laughter. Ruth and Henry finally found their happy ending, proof that even through the darkest storms,